let's get to this morning's discussion, and as I already indicated to you, it's going to be very, very big on these two documents in my hands. For those of you watching television, so there is this one by the NDC, very, very small, very handy, yet it contains 617 promises for the elections. Then there is this one, bulky, a bit heavy, by the NPP, and despite that it's bulky, it contains 143 promises for the elections. Of course, it has a lot to do with accounting for what they have done over the period. So we are asking on the questions of jobs, on the questions of education, health, and my guests may deal with a few other areas of their own specialist orientation and choice. Which manifesto wins the elections if manifestos won an election? So let's get to meet our guest this morning. And our guest, as you have seen advertised, of course, often we don't advertise all of them on the on the flyer. We have Abdul Malik Kubako, editor-in-chief of the New Crusading Guide newspaper, who is a regular panelist. Kuku, good morning and welcome.
Good morning, my brother.
Right, you were not with us last week.
Yeah.
Right. Then we are joined on Zoom by Kofi Abotsi. He's Dean, UPSA Law School.
Oh.
UPSA Law School.
You used to be at Gimpa, right?
Yes. So Dr. Jonah is asking, he used to be at Gimpa, that's right. He used to be the Dean at the Gimpa Law School. And here in the studio also is Dr. Kwesi Jonah, Senior Research Fellow, Institute for Democratic Governance, IDEG. Doc, thank you very much for making the time.
Welcome.
All right. We'll also have Professor Godfred A. Bokpin, who is an economist and professor of finance at the University of Ghana, joining us by Zoom. Good morning, Professor Bokpin. Okay.
Good morning, Samson, and good morning to our cherished listeners and viewers.
Great to have you. We will also be speaking to Larry K. Bodo, who is editor, Colleges of Education, Weekly Journal. And he'll be speaking on certain specific issues that your attention may not have been drawn to. It does appear that the Colleges of Education are set to also run a double track. Did you know about that? But is that true? We'll interrogate that. Joining us also this morning is the political avatar, the analyst extraordinaire. In fact, if you want to get the political parties, their manifestos, properly tracked and understand it in the best form possible, where to log on to is PM Express every Wednesday with this guy, Evans Mensah. Evans, thanks for joining us.
Thank you, Samson. Great to be here.
Great. Right. So
you have to do a check.
We start right away with Evans Mensah. So you and your team, so Evans is head of the political desk here at Multimedia. You and your team have done a comprehensive, complete analysis, overview of the NPP and NDC manifestos. First, how do the numbers game come at you when you start from that premise? The NDC 617 and the NPP 143 promises.
I mean, very interesting analysis. When you begin to break it down into the numbers, you see what the trends are and what the parties are seeking to do. So just what you said alone tells you a story. So for NPP, when they were seeking to come into power in 2016 in opposition, Imani had counted 510. After being in government for 4 years, the promises are drastically reduced to 143. That tells you a story. Two things I've learned doing this manifesto analysis the last few weeks, that when you are in opposition, you are pretty unrestricted in terms of the number of promises you can make. But when you get into government, you seem to be checked, one, by you get the sense of trying to consolidate what you've done over the last year. So necessarily into a reduction in the number. That doesn't necessarily for the NDC necessarily. If you look at the numbers, so let's think to the NDC because theirs is the latest. You've mentioned we counted 617 promises in the NDC manifesto this year.
All right. I think we should sort out Evans Mensah's line and get him back because it's very, very important. It's very important to begin the analysis from where he takes us, looking at the big picture as regards the documents in their entirety. And they have done the numbers and also checked repeated promises, similar promises, promises that have not been fulfilled since the last 3 election contests. The parties seem to repeat some of their promises. Some of them have had the opportunity of making a promise. They come into government and they finish a 4 cycle of 2 terms and don't fulfill it. And then they bring it back. We want to do this. So questions of credibility. How can we trust that you do something that you promised once and never did when you got the opportunity to do it? Yes, so Evans, your line was breaking. So if you can start, really, just start all over again.
Okay, great. I don't know if it's better now. Is better, Samson?
It's good.
Fantastic. So I was saying, if you look at let's start with the numbers, NDC, MPP. MPP in opposition had 510 according to money. We counted in the 2020 manifesto 143. What it tells you is 2 things. When you're in opposition, you tend to be very unlimited, unrestricted in the number of promises you make because you want to win power, sometimes at all costs. But when you get into government, something else happens. 2 things. One is you either get reality check. Second, you also possibly want to consolidate the gains that you believe you've made over the last 4 years. So that necessarily then leads into a lower number of promises. My point is, if you do that analysis, it doesn't necessarily follow for the NDC though, because in the NDC's case, in 2020, they promised, as we've counted, 617 promises. But if you compare it to 2012, when John Mahama again was running as president after the unfortunate demise of Professor Mills, and 2016, when again they were in power, seeking to regain, the numbers don't follow in terms of the analysis that you come to. So in 2012, an incumbent party, they had 569 promises that we counted, right, in 2012, in their manifesto. In 2016, an incumbent party seeking re-election had 666 promises. Now, it then drops to 617 in 2020. That tells you a story. It's not something that you could really put a lot on, just to say that in terms of quantity, the NDC tend to promise far more than the NDC when it comes to, sheer number of promises. But something, if you want to then go into breaking down sectorially, and I know you're going to do a bit of sectoral analysis, for the NDC, a very important story emerges. And the story of, and this is something that the Manifesto Committee Chairman, Professor Danso Boafo himself concedes to, a story of why they possibly lost the 2016 elections. Let's count the sectorial promises. So in education, in 2020, the NDC is promising, has 86 promises in education. But the place I want you to focus is what they are promising when it comes to social protection. Social protection is important. Why? This is NDC. It's a grassroots social democratic party. And in 2016, when they lost the election, guess how many promises they had on social protection? They had 10. 10. Now, you remember what has been said about how the NDC got disconnected from its social democratic base in 2016. In 2020, that has been rectified. Guess how many promises they are putting out now in social protection? As many as 82. In fact, it's the second most promises you find in the 2020 manifesto. Professor Boafo says, concedes that in 2016, they lost their way a bit in terms of what they are known for as a social democratic party. And that in crafting the manifesto, it reflected. They wanted to go back to that base and excite that base with policy interventions. And that is why we are seeing these huge numbers. I mean, I can go through for you the other key sectorial areas by sheer numbers. That then gives you, tell you where the party is focusing and putting a lot of the emphasis on. Another area you will talk about is health. Health has 67 promises. The third most promised sector is transport, roads, infrastructure. Isn't that quite instructive, knowing that the NDC believes one of its biggest, strongest points to be infrastructure?
Right.
And if you isolate infrastructure alone, they give you as many as 39 promises. So infrastructure, if you look at the entire infrastructure promises, that is in excess of 100. So it tells you that the NDC is pretty paying attention. They are playing to their strengths, what they believe to their strengths. One, infrastructure. Second, social protection.
Where you have trade and industry doing 67 and along with health, which is also 67, and yet when you come to ICT, they have only 3 promises, and when you come to environment, science, and technology, they have only 3 promises. That's according to your analysis. Well, what does that say about them?
Well, but that is an interesting one. So if you look at the ICT, so you are isolating ICT, the pure ICT promises by themselves is 3. But what you will find overall is that there are elements of some form of technology, ICT in some of the promises. In education, you'll find a bit of the ICT elements there. But when you isolate pure ICT promises, you count 3 of them. So you find it sort of in dotted across the places. When you lower it down to it in its purest sense, you have 3. What does it say about? And then you raise the issue about trade and industry. Trade and industry is 67, and tied with health in 4th place in terms of the most number of promises. I mean, in 4th place, it's not bad. The party is telling you that, trade and industry going forward is going to be important. As for ICT, they sort of spread it across almost all the areas have a certain element of it. So that again is what it tells me. Right. But what it says to you, so let me break it down. So you have the area with the most promise is education, followed in close place by social protection. In 3rd place is transport, roads, and infrastructure, and we know why that will be the case. And then tied in 4th place is trade and industry together with health. All have 67 promises. Of course, if you look at the other areas, ICT is important, but it's spread across the other areas. But if you look at it in the purest sense, it's 3. That should tell you a story.
What is the story when you compare the 86 promises in education against the NPP? How many in education?
Okay, I quickly need to pull up the NDC's education promise numbers for you. But if you do the once I go to do that, if you do the pure analysis of the NDC's own education, if you just go back to 2012, remember 2012, that is when Nanado was pushing free SHS quite strongly, right?
Yep.
And they were and free SHS dominated the discussions. NDC had their own counter adverts about whether free SHS is possible or not. In that year, NDC actually reacted with the education promises at 75 promises they put in there. Now, come to 2016, when free SHS again was a big deal, it drops to 62 promises. But again, going into 2020, 2021, and beyond, where the MPP says they are consolidating in their NDC manifesto promises, the NDC is doing the very opposite of that and doing a serious number of promises in that. Why do I think that is? I think we've seen how the NPP believes free SHS is almost their trump card for the elections.
Right.
If that is the case, and we speak to most people in the markets, and we've been doing this thing we call voters' voice. If you go to the market, a lot of people say they'll vote for the NPP because of free SHS.
That's right.
The NDC wants to react to that. They don't want to see that space. And so they've come with a serious number of promises just in that particular area for 2021, 2020, 2024, going into that election. So I'll pull up for you what the NPP's is.
So do that.
The education shortly.
Do that quickly, and let's look briefly at the NPP in these terms as well. Don't forget that this show is brought to you by the kind sponsorship of Bank of Africa, as strong as a group and close as a partner. MTN, everywhere you go. Ashasi University, educating ethical and entrepreneurial leaders for Africa. Consolidated Bank Ghana, we stand with you. Duraplus, where Duraplus goes, water flows. We lead, we build home for you. Star Assurance, your solid partner. And Rehoboth Properties. These are those paying for Newsfile, your most authoritative news analysis platform. And we just started with some analysis of the numbers and looking back into comparative analysis of how the parties have done over a certain period as far as the numbers of the promises are concerned, and what for them represent their trump card, and what the counter argument by each party is. And you just heard Evans Mensah, head of the political desk. And the political desk here at Multimedia has been doing a very thorough review of these manifestos. And thanks to Imani also assisting in this direction as well. And so every Wednesday, if you're looking for the best as far as getting to know everything, almost everything, in the minutest details, microscopic details of the manifestos of the two parties, your best bet is the PM Express on Wednesdays, hosted by Evans Mensah. Now, Evans, can we take a peek into the NPP and how it is also behaving as far as these numbers are concerned?
And I must quickly say that there's a gentleman, a GIG graduate called Evans Mensah, who had been doing a lot of this with us, my assistant, pouring over the numbers over the last few weeks, helping me analyze this data. And so great minds out there, very dedicated, looking into this. Shout outs to him, wherever he is. But let me quickly do that.
Of course, going into the elections, your election headquarters is the place. That's it.
Absolutely. So let's do the education. MPP 2020 Manifesto Education, 20 promises. Compared to the NDC's 86 promises. I mean, when you're in opposition, you can make a lot of promises. And I think my reading of what is happening with this is NDC wants to consolidate. They believe they've implemented the free SHS successfully. And so going into the next 4 years, there isn't much to do than to consolidate and enhance. But the NDC, having seen how people are reacting to the free SHS and possibly it being a trump card, don't want to see that space. And they are doing 86, but it's quite a huge difference in terms of the number there. What about health? Health was the leading area for the NPP at 22 promises. And that, for me, makes sense. This is coronavirus period. I mean, it's a season of a pandemic, and so that sort of was an important factor to them. Again, if you compare it to the NPP's promises, we are talking about a huge figure of 67 promises that they've put in health. And again, in all aspects of these key areas, the NDC is doing triple, sometimes 4 times more promises than the NPP is doing in their manifesto. Which other area will you talk about? If we talk about, say, infrastructure, which has been a big debate in the last few weeks, whilst the NDC is doing pure infrastructure at 60, infrastructure at 39 promises, the NPP is simply doing 7 promises. Again, a huge disparity there. Now, in NPP, social protection is just at 3. Social protection 3. But if you go to the NDC, and I pointed this out earlier, they are doing 82. This is a social democratic party.
Right.
Why not? They lost its way, as the manifesto chairman had said. Now they are reconnecting back to that base and therefore putting a lot of. So that is the sort of comparison that you get. You get transport. Transport is also very important for the NPP. If you look at the broader context of 143 total, they have 20 promises for 2020, but the NDC, as I said earlier, is doing 68 promises. So you, in terms of the share numbers, you can't really compare in terms of the NDC's volumes to the MPPs.
Right. Evans, we can't thank you enough. Thank you very much, and we'll keep our channels and dials on PM Express.
If you want to do quickly, 1 second, repeat, because I think that is so important.
All right. Unfortunately, Evans.
Okay. So just. Can you hear me?
I can hear you now. I can hear you now.
Can you hear me?
Yes.
Great. One thing that you'll be interested in something is that we counted 25 in terms of free promises that will be free.
Yeah,
for
those
the
free
NDC,
promises, right?
25 promises. Yes, and then look at something that I'm sure you interrogate. I know this is very important to you. The CRC recommendations, right?
Yep.
The repeated similar promises. In 2012, the NDC promised to implement the CRC recommendation, which they accepted in the white paper, of making the MMDC's position elected, right? They put it in their manifesto for 2012. They obviously couldn't do it. After 4 years, they brought it back in 2016, lost the elections with it. In 2012, 2020 is back. Another one is the payment of assembly members. Payment of assembly members.
Of course, making the MMDCs elective, they had a disagreement with the NPP as to the mode, the formula to go. The NPP wanted it to be partisan, and they were against making it a partisan election. So both parties, in principle, agree that we need to elect our DC, MMDCs, whatever. But how to do it has become the issue. Yes, the other point you were going to.
And a very, very final one I want to emphasize, but that was also a very controversial, popular one, the paying assembly members. Paying assembly members was first promised by John Mahama in 2012, in the 2012 manifesto. This is how they couched it. Assume responsibility for the payment of the remuneration of assembly members. Now, the question to ask, and we did ask this to the chairman of the manifesto committee, is they have 4 years to execute this particular promise. They did not do it. Guess what? In 2016, it was back. This is how they couched it in 2016 manifesto. Initiate processes to implement the Constitution Review Commission to pay assembly members allowed. They lost elections with that. And then 2020, it is back. It is a simple one-liner. Pay assembly members. Make of that what you will.
All right. Okay. Thank you very much, Evans Mensah. But just go over the freebies. The free things they want to do. The NDC is giving how many?
The NDC is giving us at least 25 promises that the NDC is promising to implement for free.
Okay. But we don't have the same featuring for the NPP?
Maybe we did not look at that.
All right. We know how sometimes how that happens. In the electioneering campaign frenzy, some of them out of emotions or out of spontaneous reaction, speaking to the crowds, will begin to talk about free that or free this. So we know that even beyond the manifestos, we are going to have them say a lot more of, I'll do this for free and do that for free. All right. Thank you very much, Evans Mensah, head of the political desk here at Multimedia. And thanks to you and your team for that very, very great job that you are doing as far as subjecting the manifestos to such microscopic scrutiny and the repeated promises that Evans speaks about as well. It's an area that I have been very interested in following the job that Evans and the team have been doing as far as repetition of the promises are concerned. Constitution Review Commission, we spent $6 million for crying out loud to do a document for overhauling the Constitution. President Akufo-Addo promised when he was a candidate that he will overhaul the Constitution. He's become president. He's been handed a document that overhauls the Constitution. Unfortunately, there is disinterest. Nobody is implementing it. $6 million of our money gone into that document, and it's sitting there waste. We'll hold the politicians to task a lot more, and we know that the hunger zone will continue to attack us, but this is our job. We know it comes with it. The risk comes with it. Thank you. Now, let me get to, do we have Dean Kofi Abotsi joining us now? Great. Good morning, Mr. Kofi Abotsi.
Good morning, Samson. How are you?
Great. Thanks for asking, sir. Now, let's begin by having you, perhaps in some 2 minutes each of an introduction, tell us your views of these manifestos in total and what they represent when we say it's a social contract. Let's begin with Professor Bokpin.
Samson, thank you very much, and good morning once again. I think given the manner of governance system that we have chosen, it's practically impossible to do without political manifestos. It's part of that process, and therefore it has come to stay largely. It's an important document that communicates first and foremost intentions, good intentions. And I think it is becoming clear to the average Ghanaian that there's a big difference between good intentions and then actual. Translating that good intention into actual has been a problem. So, but you also realize that the electorates are vulnerable. And then also politicians are also vulnerable. So to that extent, we are all trying to take advantage of each other. So you realize that a lot of promises. But my concern is to look at the medium through which these promises are translated into actual. And unfortunately, the focus hasn't been on that. Because even though I'm not a lawyer, but I don't think that there's a legal manifesto is a legal document necessarily, but the only demonstrable way of translating the political manifestos into actual is through the budget statement. Now, so you see over the years, and I'm saying this because, look, something, we are in a unique opportunity to talk about this objectively because the two major political parties have tasted power. And we've seen how their promises get translated through the budget. So the over promises that are made, they try to find a way of passing them through the budget, but it has been very difficult. And my role this morning is to demonstrate to you the huge variance in our budget, where there's very little space in our budget to accommodate the promises. And for that reason, you'll find that when the parties, when they are in power and then they present their budget statement, they are in a hurry to demonstrate to Ghanaians that they are implementing their promises. Then the actual from that budget tends to be very, very wide. And again, over the years, you see that when they promise, there is one level which is quantity, checking the box. There's another element which is quality and sustainability, and that gets sacrificed. So you realize that we are driven by short-termism to please the electorate on a number of these promises that have been made, but really the quality of translating that into actual has been very, very miserable.
Thank you very much, Professor Bokpin.
There are demonstrable data that we can present to show within the NDC's 8 years, And Evans talked quite a lot about them. And number of the promises that they made, even with a better fiscal space from 2011 to 2016, that we were not able to accommodate those promises. Then you can talk about the MPP. And here, let me say this without maybe claiming to be in one party or the other. The MPP seemed to have learned a useful lesson, given the criticisms that came with their huge promises and what they've been able to do. So you see a bit of a reduction and then the need to consolidate that. Unfortunately for the NDC, having been in power for 8 years and the challenges they've seen, of course, have gone the other way around. So we need to be very considerate. And 2020 is not going to be like any other year. And something, if you look at the way the promises have been made, and I want to submit here without any apology, it is as though we are not in COVID times. And it's as though COVID is just going to disappear with the election on December 7th.
Okay.
We are talking about COVID-19 distributional effect, which is going to last even beyond a generation. And Ghana's own economic recovery and all of that will go beyond 4 years. What that means is that there is practically no physical space to accommodate these excessive promises.
All right.
And therefore, there's a high propensity that politicians are out there to deceive Ghanaians for vote.
Thank you, Prof. Hold it on there for us. Let's get Dr. Abotsi's preliminary, view as to the whole document and the questioning of social contract. And if you may start, Dean Abotsi, on the question that Professor Bokpin is looking for an answer. The manifestos, are they binding? Are they, like you say in law, are they justiciable? Can they be enforced? Can the parties be compelled to redeem the promises in their manifestos?
Well, thank you, first of all, Samson, and thank you to my colleagues, distinguished colleagues on the panel. Manifestos are, at best, social contracts, as you've indicated. They are not legal contracts, and therefore they are not justiciable, on the basis of which one can mount a legal claim on the face of it. Manifestos contain promises, but these are what can be called contingent promises. The reason they are contingent promises is because, the reason they are contingent promises is because they are contingent on the happening of a variety of factors. So they are contingent largely on the happening of government revenues meeting certain targets, on the availability of resources, and therefore, to that extent, they are highly volatile, they are contingent. One cannot compel government to be bound by its manifesto promises if the contingencies on the basis of which the promises are made do not happen. Again, they are understood to be made as largely political statements. And so in that respect, they are not the kinds of promises that are contained in contracts. The promises that are contained in contracts are legal promises. These are political promises. So while there are other avenues in constitutional scheme of things for holding them accountable, and mind you, the Supreme Court in the National Lotteries case held that the provisions of the directive principles of state policy, a good number of which are actually contained in these campaign promises, are binding or can be justiciable in the Supreme Court. So if you want to hold the government accountable for these campaign promises, you have to establish that they also fall under the directive principles of state policy. In that respect, you are holding the government accountable per constitutional obligation and not per the campaign promise per se. But in respect to the general comments, as you asked earlier, I would like us, first of all, to look at these in context, i.e., one, that manifestos are largely populist-driven. So if you look at the promises that are made, they are largely populist in character. Populist in the sense that they tend to appeal to the majority of people, numbers. It is no surprise, therefore, that it seems that the two leading parties are competing in the freedom business, if you like, for want of a better word, the free, to use your word, the freebies business. Everyone is trying to show that it can give the maximum number of things for free. And the reason this is because as a country that is largely made up of, if you like, largely poor people, so to speak, whatever you promise, which are free, you are likely to have the largest number of people following you because people can't afford to pay, and so they are happy if therefore these services can be provided for free. The danger is that we run what has been called or can be called the race to the bottom mentality, i.e. where the two parties are competing in who actually goes to the lowest in the sense of who can promise the most free things, which we know that from a purely practical standpoint may be unsustainable in many ways. Now, I think Professor Bokpin made an important point, and the point has to do with the fact that these promises do not appear to take account of the scenario in which we find ourselves, the COVID scenario. We have a situation with tourism. Our tourism sector is in a deplorable state because of COVID. International business is suffering largely because of COVID. The airport was recently opened, or our port was recently opened. The cost of borrowing on the capital markets is going to go through the roof because of the risk of default by reason of the COVID scenario by many countries. And so we have all these tensions on the one end of the spectrum, and then on the other end of the spectrum, we have huge expenditure that governments, I'm talking about the 2021 government, is promising to undertake, particularly between the two parties. That presents a tension that has to be dealt with. Now, it's important for us to also therefore remember that because these promises are politically sensitive in character, they tend to depart from mainstream state-centric governance agenda. Not all popular policies are necessarily good. In other words, you may have policies that people are happy about, and the reason people are happy about them is because you are providing them for free. So people are happy, so they are popular in that sense. But they may not necessarily be good. Be good in the sense of providing overall for the balance of government, providing overall for social amenities and facilities, providing overall for the good and welfare of all in the society. And so by reason of that, you may not necessarily we may risk the danger of actually, as it were, providing for the happiness of people without necessarily providing for the health of the country and the economy. So these are things that we have to look at moving forward. And then finally, I would just say that reading the two manifestos, I see a lot of promises, but I don't see a lot of costing. I don't see a lot of means testing in light of some of the things that have been said.
Please repeat that. You say you see a lot of promises, but you don't see a lot of costing, or what?
Or means testing.
Means testing. Okay. Right. What a note to end your preliminary view. Professor Bokpin spoke about short-termism, the question of funding, which you also mentioned a while ago. He talked about quantity versus quality when it comes to executing these promises. And thanks for the free legal advice you just gave. Professor Bokpin sought a while ago as to whether or not I could go to court and hold the politician accountable for the promises they made. And Mr. Abotsi mentioned the directive principles of state policy. Just a bit of context for you so your understanding is complete for those of you who may not know. In chapter 6 of the Constitution of Ghana, we have what you may call the collective will of Ghanaians as to what we want our country to be, the things we want to be done. If you like, you can call chapter 6 or the directive principles of state policy in the Constitution as our manifesto, as in the real citizens' manifesto, which the parties are supposed to be executing. And they do it bits and pieces, and sometimes they cherry pick in the way they prefer. And Dr. Abotsi is saying that the courts have said that even that, not all of it, is something that you can hold a government legally bound to provide, even though some of them you can hold the government to bind them to do it. Let me just read just small pieces for you so you have a context to it. Now, the directive principles of state policy begins with this. It says, the directive principles of state policy contained in this constitution, in this chapter, shall guide all citizens, parliament, the president, the judiciary, the council of state, the cabinet, political parties, and other bodies and persons in applying or interpreting this constitution or any other law in taking and implementing any policy decisions, in taking or implementing any policy decisions for the establishment of a just and free society. This is our constitution, the citizens' constitution. Then among others, it says that the state shall protect and safeguard the independence, unity, and territorial integrity of Ghana, seek the well-being of all her citizens. The state shall promote just and reasonable access by all citizens to public facilities, services. This includes health and all those matters, education, if you like. In accordance with law, the state shall cultivate among all Ghanaians respect for fundamental human rights and freedoms, dignity of the human person. The state shall actively promote the integration of the peoples of Ghana and prohibit discrimination and prejudice on the grounds of place of origin, circumstance of birth, ethnic origin, gender, among others. I'll just read two more and then we may end it there. But there's a lot in there that tells you what Ghanaians want, have decided to be our manifesto. The state shall foster a spirit of loyalty to Ghana that overrides sectional and ethnic and other loyalties. Achieve regional and gender balance. Provide adequate facilities throughout the country. Decentralization, administrative, financial, among others. Balanced development of all the regions. Redressing all the imbalances, affording opportunity for everybody among all those things. So if you want to know the Citizens Manifesto, that's where you have to read. Now, Dr. Jonah, what will you also say, looking at the two manifestos and your general preliminary commentary about what they represent for Ghanaians?
Yeah, thank you so very much, Samson. I have listened very carefully to my good friend, Professor Bokpin and Dr. Kofi Abotsi. They have raised very, very important points about the manifesto. One of the points that Dr. Abotsi made is that they are populist in character. And Prof. Bokpin also noted that a lot of the promises are beyond the capacity of the budget even to accommodate. And therefore, there's a high tendency of non-delivery of the promises, and so on and so forth. So
the goal is to win power.
Yes.
Right.
So why is this the case? Because it is not just 2020, 2024, we are going to have the same phenomenon coming up. So the first question to ask then is, why is this the case?
Right.
Samson, this happens because in Ghanaian politics...
So now you can adjust your mask, right, at your nose. Thank you.
Okay.
You can adjust it, pull it up. That's why I gave you the sanitizer.
Okay.
Thank you, sir. Okay.
Because in Ghanaian politics, the manifesto has come to play perform two contradictory functions. On the one hand, to the political parties, the manifesto is a vote-catching instrument. It is a marketing tool. This is something I'm going to use to bag all the votes I can get. Therefore, the more promises I put in, the higher the chances of collecting this vote. But the manifesto has also come to assume another function in Ghanaian politics. It has become the foundation of the medium-term development agenda of the government. So you make all the promises with intention of winning the election, but unfortunately, you forget that once you have won the election, the manifesto then becomes the foundation of your medium-term. The next 4 years, what am I going to do? Okay, let me push the manifesto promises into my development agenda so that they can be attained. Now, so the two are contradictory. Pushing them into your development agenda brings you face to face with a resource constraint. How much resources are available to me to translate all the promises I made into action? So you started with a document that was essentially a marketing tool, but you end up with something which you actually have to implement and implementation requires resources. It is the conflict between these two functions of the manifesto that is giving us all these observations that my two good friends have made. But overall, what do I think of Ghanaian manifestos? One, I think they are also making these huge promises because we are not operating within an overall national goal. If take something like the Sustainable Development Goals, you want to have poverty, do this, do that, do that, do that, do that. Now, if we had a genuine national Sustainable Development Goals, then every party's manifesto would be geared towards achieving it. The way to achieve it will be different from party to party. One party will put so much emphasis on state enterprises. Another party will go strictly by private enterprise and so on. It will be different.
Dr. Nimoy Thompson's NDPC gave us a 41 or 40-year development plan that each of the parties should find a way to fit in.
Yes.
We did a Constitution Review Commission and said we want to make it binding so that the parties will only come in and provide the goods in there. The parties are not interested. They say don't bind us with a development plan.
Samson, because we are not operating within an overall, you are free to promise heaven on earth.
No, but we are the citizens. The parties go there to represent and say, do what we want.
Yeah.
Why is it that we go to a comprehensive constitution review process? We pay and spend as much as $6 million. Then we produce what the people say they want. They want a binding national development plan. Then the politicians say we don't want it. Don't bind us. and we are okay with it. We sit and watch. They must decide what happens.
This will be the subject of another long discussion.
Okay.
Now, but the absence of an overall national development framework is causing problems.
Okay.
You are free to promise anything at all you like. But the second and most important weakness, therefore, of these manifestos is weak intersectoral linkages. I am promising that I'm going to expand education. I'm going to build schools. I'm going to produce a lot of graduates. The next question you have to ask yourself is, where will these graduates go? After I've produced them, would the job be there for them? You are promising...
You may have graduate association of graduate unemployed graduates.
Yes.
And then, like Professor Bokpin said, I don't know whether you say NABCO is short-termism. You do a NABCO and give them jobs to come in and get paid national service allowance for 2 years and exit. And if they are lucky, they get employed by whoever they went to intern with.
Yes. So the lack of intersectoral linkages, if you are building more hospitals and clinics, you have to think, am I going to produce enough doctors to fill them? So the manifestos, because they are a shopping list, because of all the comments my two colleagues have made, lack the intersectoral linkage. You do something in one sector, it will affect the other sector.
Okay.
And so, but it's a shopping list. So you just continue listing them without asking yourself, are there any linkages between the various sectors that I am dealing with? This is another weakness.
Okay.
And so, Samson, these are issues that as a nation you will have to deal with.
Okay, so like you say, whilst the manifestos are a vote-catching instrument, they have assumed an important role in our political landscape and have become the medium-term development goals for a political party. Yes, Koko, what will be your opening comments when you look at manifestos in general and these manifestos that the two biggest parties have produced?
Well, manifestos, well, I might be wrong, but manifestos have a very limited scope and coverage in terms of their impact, target audience, and the effect eventually they do have. I agree, within the realm of research, students, academia, the middle class, yes, manifestos have a greater impact. Here we are, seated and interrogating the manifestos of the two big parties. our audience, and now because of the benefit of social media, it's a wider scope in terms of people who would assimilate what we are saying and get a better understanding of it. But relatively still a very limited scope, coverage, and for that matter, its target audience.
The manifesto's definition is that they are a public declaration of policy and aims.
I agree.
Issued by a political party before an election.
Yes, theoretically, you are right. Intellectually, you are right. Academically, you are right. I was looking at how they impact on the general electorate.
Okay.
And what effect it has relative to the outcomes of elections. And I was saying that in that area it's limited.
Okay.
But you don't underestimate its importance. And dependent on which areas a manifesto highlights and the campaign, of course, because of COVID, we are not going to have the conventional types of campaigning and things. But see, to give you an example, for instance, if we talk about free SHS, it's catchy and it became a consistent theme 2008.
Okay, 208.
It started from 2008, 2008,
2016, yes.
2012, and 2016. Yes, it's in a manifesto, but it went beyond the traditional framework of the target audience of people who take their time to assess and interrogate manifestos. Not just because it was put in a manifesto, but because of how it was also introduced into the public, wider public domain, and the controversies that ensued on its viability, feasibility, or otherwise. It became very catchy. You can bet that across the nation, a lot of people who had no intellectual or academic abilities were drawn into the debate because what? It was to do with education. It was to do with parents and families and their ability to actually offset the cost and access relative to education. 3 different elections had free SHS right in the front burner. Now, having operationalized it with all its challenges, you see that yes, that is a matter. Up to now, it's still a subject, and we'll come to that, I'm sure, because of the challenges, the promise to cancel double track. So it means that we still actually have the free SHS agenda on the front burner.
That's right.
That tells you that yes, something could be contained in the manifesto, but it depends on how it's communicated, how it is brought into the public domain. It could be the alpha and omega of the whole manifesto. Hundreds and hundreds of promises, many areas, health, education, infrastructure, and the rest. I can bet you quite a lot of the electorate out there, their attention will not be drawn to many of those things.
They won't read.
They won't read, and they might not even hear, especially now that we have COVID constrained type of campaigning. So the catchy ones, the ones that immediately affect their interest, are those some of them will be looking at. That's the point I'm making. And I'm happy. I mean, I haven't done a comprehensive study of the 2 manifestos. It's not possible. Even us don't do it. I don't read from page 1 to
That's why for today we are limiting ourselves to the questions of job, education, and health.
Fantastic. And that's the point I was going to make. That's the way you go about it. You've taken highlights for us to deal with, and that's where the focus is. And to be honest with you, I like what Evans and his team are also doing.
Fantastic.
Some of us can't do it because it's a lot of work.
Yeah.
It takes a lot of work.
It requires a lot of time.
Honestly. So yes, what they are doing will help people like us to focus on some essential areas and then be able to move on. So it's just like, it depends. The NDC, let me also bring in an element from their side. For instance, you see they brought in the point about Okada. It's controversial, but it's been brought to the front line. And both parties appear to be struggling, even the incumbent.
So we'll deal with that under Jobs.
Yeah, but that's the point I was making.
It looks like the incumbent has a problem because he has, what do you call it?
Somersaulted.
Yeah, it's somersaulted if you like, but it seems to have conflicting messages as to whether or not it had any commitment to wanting to look at Okada, you know, from the way that the NDC is proposing to do it.
I agree with you.
Right.
Yes, so that's the point I'm making.
Okay.
Sometimes those elements that are pegged broad. National health insurance was the same before the 2000 election. It was one thing that captured the attention and imagination of a wider segment of the electorate. Not all those things you put in the manifesto. So yes, manifestos are important. It's good. As our democracy grows and deepens, we should challenge the parties to produce such documents and interrogate them, and especially those that have had the opportunity to rule. The winning manifestos become more critical to interrogating to see whether indeed they delivered or did not deliver.
Okay.
And we've had winning manifestos. 2000 manifesto, NPP was a winning one. You need to interrogate that one and see if they did deliver. 2004, they had a winning manifesto. And then 2016, they've had 3.
2008.
No, 2008 is the NDC winning
manifesto. So yeah.
And then 2012 winning manifesto NDC. You have to do a checklist.
2012, the NDC had 500 plus promises.
Yes, but I can bet you it is maybe about just 10 that had the power to attract the public's imagination. And it depends on how you communicate it and you deal with it. Then you can capture the imagination of the greater electorate.
Okay, so something interesting happening in the media landscape, and we should all admit, is that this time it looks like the media is paying a lot of attention to scrutinize these things a lot more in detail. So we will take a break and then return to begin with the various sectors. So we can start with jobs, we can look at education, and then end with health. But as I said, my guests have their various areas of expertise. Dr. Jonah is here. I mean, if you're looking for governance, who else? So if he has something to say about governance, Kofi Abotsi is on. If you're looking for justice, you know, anti-corruption, of course, Professor Bokpin is out there. If you're asking a questions of the economy and, you know, the money, of course, you can't leave him out. Now, so I will say that we'll take a break, but keep your messages coming in. We'll be sharing them. If you have questions too, you can be asking your questions. For those of you who, particularly the NDC guys who have swamped the social media page and are rather abusing my person, I think the best thing you do is send a message. If I read out that message, it is your party's message that has been read, because I won't read the abuse and insult at me. Those of you saying I'm NDC, and you know in your I'm MPP, you know in your heart that I'm not. Okay, just this one before we go. Kabila, CPP's Kabila says that good morning. Thank you for the topic and the rich panelists. Political actors most often would do whatever they could to win power, including mouth-watering manifestos. That said, the burden shifts. The citizenry is responsible, then get obligated to be sensitive, awake, and discernible. The citizenry decide to be led honorably or misled dishonorably. In my view, the Ghanaian electorate have not been selective enough, and that is where they need to wake up. And we also understand that the PPP, Progressive People's Party, is outdooring its 2020 flag bearer this very today, 6:30 p.m. We wish them the very best. They will give us a woman, as we understand, to lead the party.
Bridget, right?
Yes, Bridget. We'll be right back.